the Boundless Authenticity podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Boundless Authenticity. My guest is Chris Horlacher, an expert in business and finance, as well as interesting topics such as Freemasonry, the Anunnaki, Nephilim, and many other things. Chris is also the founder of the Library of Cerne and the author of the Apocalypse of Yajnavalkya, which will be tonight's topic of discussion. So Chris, how's it going?
Oh, good, thanks. And great to be on.
It's good to have you on. So can you give us a brief idea of how you got into the aforementioned topics?
Well, it started when I was in my late teens, I guess. And at the time, I was fascinated with ancient Egypt and, the pyramids. And I'd heard about the ancient aliens theories of Erich von Daniken or Zecharia Sitchin. So I was intrigued by the idea that there was a part of human history that had been lost or erased. And so I was going down one particular rabbit hole involving the Gnostics, who were a sect of Christians that started in the very beginning in the first century, that over a long course of time were eventually completely wiped out as heretics. And they were, according to the book I was reading, allegedly caretakers of Jesus's bloodline. And because they had this knowledge, they were targeted by the Catholic Church and eventually exterminated. And my mom sees me reading this book, realizes or knows enough to know that it's about the Gnostics, and says to me, you need to talk to your grandfather about this stuff because he's a really high-ranking Freemason and he knows a lot about these sorts of things. And sure enough, so I go talk to my grandfather, and yes, he's in the Freemasons, and that sort of is the beginning of my process into Freemasonry, eventually becoming a Master Mason. But I haven't really been to lodge in 10 years because my search for these things have led me back out of Freemasonry. There are limits to their knowledge, just as there are limits to any other, I guess, institution. And kept looking. And, let's say about 20 years later, because I'm 43 now, or going to be 43, they led me to what eventually became the Apocalypse of Yajnavalkya, which ties everything together in a way that I had never heard before. It was novel to me. And so when I received this manuscript for the book, it got me really excited, and we worked together to bring this to the public. And it's an astonishing tale, but it seems like it's hit the nail on the head in terms of bringing together all of the world's mythologies, and why do we see all of these commonalities between them? Why is a cataclysmic disaster or a flood remembered in our most ancient histories from every culture around? Every culture has a flood myth. The Native Americans all have myths of floods or terrible things falling out of the sky and destroying the land. The flood story of the Sumerians with Utnapishtim or Ziusudra or Atrahasis, depending on which one you're reading. And trickling down into the story of Noah. Then we also have the story of Manu in India. And also the story of the I think it was the Yellow Emperor in China. Also a story of a great flood coming over mountains and destroying everything in its path. So this global tradition of this story really it really is sort of one of the most important days in the history of our kind, Homo sapiens, because it's etched itself into the cultural memory of everybody everywhere around the world. And for a long time, everybody was trying to figure out when this happened. And maybe about 15 years ago, a group of researchers came together and started publishing papers on the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. And now, over 100 papers later, this seems to be the real deal. They've even found craters now in Greenland, in Hiawatha, that potentially date to this moment in time. And everything is pointing to 12,800 years ago. And that's recent enough to be part of human memory. And it seems as though this is what this collective remembering of this day, it seems to be what they're all pointing towards, this one event. And now, interestingly enough, now that if we take 12,800 years ago to be the day of the Great Flood, some interesting things start happening. So if anybody has read the Book of Enoch, in the Book of Enoch, this is the story of someone on the line of Adam. He's the Adam's seventh from Adam. He's the father of Methuselah, who is the father of Lamech, who is the father of Noah. But Enoch has a book. It's called the Book of Enoch. And unfortunately, it's not in most versions of the Bible. It's only still part of the Ethiopian Bible. But Enoch is referenced in the Bible. It's quoted in the book of Jude, which is the second to last book of Enoch. And of course, Enoch shows up in Genesis, where it says that God took him while he was still alive. And that was that. And bye-bye Enoch. So if you read the Book of Enoch, it's an incredible, incredible story, and really helps you understand the events of Genesis in a much better light. One of the things that happens is, of course, Enoch is taken to the westernmost edge of the world, where he meets God and is shown something up in the sky that God tells Enoch is coming in 70 generations. Now, if we assume a generation is 20 years, as it's historically always been, that's 1,400 years. Now, if we add 1,400 years to 12,800 years, we get to 14,200 years ago. What is happening in the Book of Enoch? Well, the Book of Enoch describes the arrival of a bunch of beings from heaven. The Sumerians have stories about this as well, the arrival of the Anunnaki, beings from elsewhere, gods. And so in the Book of Enoch, not only do these divine beings arrive, but Enoch is also taken back to where the gods live to spend the rest of his days. These angels impregnate women in the Fertile Crescent, and their children are the Nephilim, and these go on to be the kings and heroes of old. So we have two bloodlines, essentially. One bloodline coming from wherever the gods come from, arriving in the Levant as the fallen watchers. And then we have another bloodline, i.e. Enoch, or Adam's line, going to wherever God lives. And remember the time, 14,200 years ago. Now, if we look at gene flows, we see the arrival of what must be a large group of men into the Levant, all from the Y haplogroup E-M81. E-M81, where does that come from? Well, that comes from West Africa. it's from a culture the anthropologists call Ibero-Maurutians. So people from West Africa went to the Levant, but we also find Levantine DNA, E-M78, Y haplogroup, show up in West Africa in this same time frame. And also only one Y haplogroup, because we've recovered skeletons from this region, and they've been described as 1/3 Ibero-Mauritian, which is the African culture, and 2/3 Natufian, which is the culture that existed in the Levant. So we have this exchange of genetic material from these two cultures in these two parts of the world. Let's say, so now, if this is talking about the same events, this arrival of these people who were apparently perceived as gods, well, who were these people? Who are the Ibero-Mauritians? Well, interestingly enough, this is where you find Atlantis. And yes, Atlantis is a real place. It existed, and its people traveled the world and encountered all sorts of cultures, ancient cultures, 10,000 or more years ago, and they were worshipped as gods. And this isn't really this shouldn't surprise you. It's still going on today, because in the South Pacific right now, there is what's called a cargo cult who worships an American military person they've called John Frum, and John Frum is their god. And they dress up in American military uniforms and have built makeshift planes and a parade deck, and they march around and do drills, thinking that it's going to bring back the planes, which are going to bring the cargo. So whenever we have a primitive culture meeting an advanced one, we have a recipe for a religion is born. And as the Atlanteans explored Earth, unfortunately, it seems as though they've triggered religions everywhere they went. Now, this appears to have been something that they've wanted to perhaps... they found themselves in a position they didn't want to be in. And this is where we get to Adam. Remember, Adam, the bloodline of Adam is the one that Enoch took to West Africa, E-M78. Now, in this bloodline, we also find what's called a time of most recent common ancestor, which means at this particular point in time, all the branches of this Y haplogroup died off except for one, meaning one male survived, which then repopulated the bloodline. That cutoff point is 12,800 years ago. A descendant of Adam surviving the flood 12,800 years ago. It's a lot of interesting parallels we find in the genetic record now. Once we have the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis telling us 12,800 years ago, this is when the flood happened. Now, there's a lot more to this story, and I don't want to spoil the whole book for your audience. But you let me know where you want to go from here.
Well, I mean, all of that is very compelling information, and it leads to ask the question, why has there been such, I don't want to use the word conspiracy, but why is there seem to be an apparent agenda to bury this information and keep it out of the mainstream?
Well, I have some theories about that. The book does too. But the Nephilim children of these people who were exiled out of Atlantis for reasons you'll learn in the book. They continued on their lines. They were it seems to be exiled to basically die in exile. They weren't supposed to take wives and continue on their family line, I suppose, because that's part of their condemnation in the Book of Enoch. But so these families became the ruling class of the old world, but they've always been the ruling class of this world. Ancient families, 10,000 years or more, that got started in this part of the world at this particular time. These people from there traveled all over the world, starting about 8,000 years ago. And you can see them carrying with them a legacy of megalithic stonework, particular artistic motifs as well, certain poses or themes in the statuary that you see. So, for example, you see very similar poses in the statues found at Göbekli Tepe or Karahan Tepe and the Moai of Easter Island, for example. But then also on the opposite end of the world, the megaliths in Indonesia on Sulawesi Island, in Bada Valley, all standing in the exact same pose for whatever reason. Of course, if you're making a statue, of course you're going to make it in this exact pose. No, it can't be possibly a coincidence. There's a meaning behind this, the pose that they're in, and they're usually sitting bare chested, hands clasped over their belly, or holding a big giant phallus. So these people were into fertility or sex worship, and that sort of ritualization of sex and conducting these big orgies on drugs, these sorts of activities that you see the elite of today engaging in, it's still going on because it's the same people who've been running the planet since the days of Noah, basically.
So do you think that there will ever come a time where these people lose their authority?
It's got to happen. It's got to happen because the human species, I think, with this sort of yoke around its neck is really at an evolutionary dead end. And if you read UFO contact reports, this is sort of what we're being told. We've taken technology down a path that is going to lead to just complete annihilation, and the value system of the ruling class of this world is just completely and utterly screwed up and turned upside down. And they know what's going on because, of course, they were there when it happened. The Atlanteans, i.e., the people who we see flying around in UFOs now, because that's them, and they've told us that as well. And we even have the evidence that yes, at least some of these visitors are completely fully human and ancient, from lines not seen in the genetic record for thousands and thousands of years. But yeah, so if prophecy is going to be any sort of guide, it seems as though events are happening at this very moment that are bringing us towards an intervention, it would seem. Because, well, for example, the governments of the planet are now conducting mass experiments that can impact human genetics, i.e. the mRNA vaccines, which billions at this point have taken now. And what long-term impacts, and I mean like even over generations, is that technology going to have? Are we going to wind up in a situation sometime very soon where it's like, like Children of Men, and no child has been born for 20 years or something, and everything is falling apart and falling into chaos. So this world, though, and the human gene pool that is here does seem to be some sort of resource to these visitors. And this is where you get stories about this hybridization program. But it doesn't seem like it's actually a hybridization program. It seems like it's an anti-speciation program. Whereas these are visitors, human visitors from another planet. They could look very different from us because it's been thousands of years that they've been living on this other planet under these other conditions. So who knows, 10,000 years, we can turn wolves into every kind of dog you can see. So what could that do to a human? But it does seem that they come here periodically to sample our DNA or bring some of our DNA from the primordial sort of human homeworld, great, 100% homebrew human DNA, and import that up into their colonies on other planets to keep all of humanity sort of together in a sense. And there may be consequences to speciation that go beyond just not being able to interbreed anymore. It may be the case that there are spiritual consequences as well, because a lot of people talk about Atlanteans are incarnating here in preparation for something, or that people have had who incarnate here have talked about having lives on other worlds where there are other humans. And so, history is full of these kinds of stories. And so one has to wonder, is there a kind of network that exists between our planet and other human planets where this reincarnation can happen across worlds? It seems like maybe they're trying to keep that together. Excuse me.
I think I lost you there for a minute.
Oh no. Where did we drop out?
Yeah, I think I heard you say it seems like they're trying to, and then it went blank. So I missed the last thing that you said.
Oh, well, they're trying to keep humanity as sort of one big biological family, to keep this sort of interplanetary network, reincarnation network going, where we can incarnate there, they can incarnate here or on other human worlds, which is something that is talked about in a lot of spiritual texts. Even like what is that book called? Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda. He talks, or his master talks, Sri Yukteswar, about reincarnating on other worlds and serving the people there as spiritual guides. So it does seem that humanity is already a multi-planetary species, and why shouldn't we be at this point? We're a 300,000-year-old species who apparently for thousands and thousands and thousands of years existed knowing that a disaster from space was going to come down and destroy the planet. So imagine if you're living in that kind of society. And so what is the overarching incentive that nature has placed upon you for thousands of years? And that is, pay attention to what's going on up there, and something is coming, and your best bet is to get off the planet. And you have thousands of years, at least 70 generations, which is what God tells Enoch. You had at least that long to solve this problem. So if we worked, if we worked for 1400 years on getting off of this planet, I think we would eventually arrive at a solution. And it seems they did, and left this world at the beginning of what the Greeks call the Iron Age, or the Hindus call the Kali Yuga, because this is the age at which all the cultures say the gods left the earth, and so there's a good reason for that, because their whole homeland was destroyed, and they've already established interstellar colonies, and so off they went. And they still keep tabs on the planet. They do appear to people. What we see these days is different from what we saw in the early days of UFO sort of contacts, I guess, beginning at around the time of the Roswell incident, I think was 1947. And through the 50s, a lot of people were contacted by completely human-looking people saying that they were from the Pleiades. And that's interesting, because the Native Americans, their gods or their creator are people from the Pleiades. And cultures all over the world, again, have all kinds of myths about the Pleiades being the home of the gods, and all sorts of legends about them. And again, is this just all coincidence? And the book makes it very clear that no, this is not coincidence. And this is a story we really ought to have known. It's just that, again, we got all of our problems. Where are they coming from? The ruling class. They've excised these books from the Bible. The Book of Enoch is out of the Bible. They've turned the search for Atlantis now from a real archaeological endeavor into the definition of pseudo-archaeology. At least according to one place, is searching for Atlantis. Searching for Atlantis it equals pseudo-archaeology, even though 100 years ago the Smithsonian is talking about it in their annual reports. So yeah, pseudo-archaeology. But this is a real place, and there was a history to it all that we ought to have known. But this knowledge was taken away from us by the people who are still in charge of this planet. But hopefully, with any luck, it won't be that way for much longer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have often referred to the Bible as a programming mechanism. What is your take on the Bible and its purpose?
Well, it is, but it wasn't. If you take the original texts, it's not necessarily that the original texts were intended to be that way, but the end product that we have now, that one calls the Bible, is a heavily edited, redacted, modified, propagandized book. So, yes, going into it, you have to understand that this despite it having been, the version of these stories we see now is pretty much the version we see 2,000 years ago in the earliest versions of the Bible, like the Codex Sinaiticus or the Codex Vaticanus. The text we have today is pretty much exactly the same as what was then. But even at that point, you can tell that a lot of editing has been going on for this. Like the whole book of Enoch is a collage of other books that, some of them have been chopped up and spread around and told, and you hear the same passage in one part of the book, and then you read on through the book, and then you pages and pages and pages and pages later, you find you're reading the same thing again. So this book is an assembly already, as it was discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls, 2,300 years old. The Book of Enoch was already kind of chopped up and edited and made out of stuff that was much, much, much more ancient. So, but you once you read it, you know absolutely you know why it was eventually taken out of the Bible, and also why the Book of Jude was very nearly taken out of the Bible. It is still in there. It's the second to last book. And it quotes the Book of Enoch, which a certain group of people did not want in the book, i.e., the ones that Enoch makes look very nasty, awful, evil people, i.e., the fallen watchers and the Nephilim. Because in the Book of Jude, it says, hey, Christianity, ancient Christian churches, beware, you are being infiltrated by the Nephilim. And so, yeah, is the Catholic Church and what we see going on in the Catholic Church with the gay orgies that the priests have been organizing for decades, or this demonic throne that the Pope sits on, or all the other stuff that the Catholic Church gets into, and even the practice of the Eucharist, where they're eating the flesh and drinking the blood of Jesus. And yes, it's real flesh and real blood, because one of the catechisms of the Catholic faith is that you believe in transubstantiation, and the power of the priest will transmute crackers and wine into blood and human flesh. And it's required to believe that you believe this. And it's a big deal if you spit it out. That's called host desecration, and you can be excommunicated for it. And to be forgiven, you can only be forgiven by the Pope. So, strange practice to implement. And incidentally, the Atlanteans do not seem to like cannibals. So it'd be interesting to see how they feel about pretend cannibalism.
I agree with you. I have no arguments whatsoever. I kind of have been curious.
I mean, your own book says your churches have been infiltrated.
Yeah, exactly. It was exactly what I was about to say. I've been curious about it since then. Especially, I remember we did a lot of stuff in history from the time I was about age 13 that really just changed my opinion on things when they started talking about Marcion and how he was yelling about Satan is the God of the Bible and all this crazy stuff. I was like, listen, hold on, I'm done. I'm out. I don't want anything more to do with this. But it kind of haunted me throughout the rest of my teenage years. And I had rejected religion, but my rejection of it made me even more curious about what was going on there. And I think I eventually came to similar conclusions as you, because they tell you right there exactly what they're doing, and that the ones disseminating the information are the bad guys. But for some reason, people just don't get it. That's why I've always called it a programming mechanism. So, yeah. Anyways, not to get too far.
In the Bible, Jesus... In the Bible, Jesus even says, "My people are destroyed for lack of wisdom," and exactly. They're stuck in poverty because of all the things they don't know that have been kept from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it has become this cult-like mentality that it's hard to break people out of. And as a person that has done exit programming, deprogramming, I should say, exit counseling from people who've been in cults and stuff, it's hard to get them to be fascinated by the actual reality of the world and the way that it works. You can only get them onto like Christianity. You can't get them off of their cult onto nothing. They have to have something, and they can't seem to think for themselves or see beyond that veil for one reason or another. And I've been frustrated with it, but I guess I've let it go. I've let it go now because I'm accustomed to it. But earlier, like I said, I don't want to get too far into that territory. Earlier, you mentioned an anti-speciation program. Could you elaborate more on that?
Yeah. So, evolution 101, you take two groups of animals from the same species and you separate them. And common example here is you're in some sort of archipelago, and so you take a bunch of animals from one island and you put them on a different island in the archipelago that has different conditions, and you will eventually see that these species start diverging from each other in behaviors, in appearances. And after enough time, eventually, if you reintroduce these two species, they will no longer be able to interbreed. So an example of this sort of process in action are donkeys. So donkeys are a mix between a mule. Mule's a mix between a donkey and a horse. A mule cannot reproduce. It's just, you can make this hybrid sort of being, but it can't reproduce. A liger is another example of this, where you cross a lion and a tiger. So you get an infertile offspring. So this is a genetic dead end, basically. And so this is essentially speciation in action, a part has happened. If they were completely speciated, they would not. These two lions and tigers, or horses and donkeys, would not be able to produce anything at all. Never, let alone an infertile offspring. So if now we look at this problem of evolution in terms of interstellar travel. Well, that's going to happen to us. That's going to happen to human beings as we go from world to world to world, unless every world is exactly like this one in climate and gravity and atmospheric pressure. So, I mean, that's a tall order, and space is pretty big. There's a lot of exploring to do. And if you're Atlanteans and you're kind of in a rush to get off the planet, I guess, beggars can't be choosers, and you wind up on whatever planet you're able to sustain yourself on, at least for an interim period. So once this happens, immediately evolution never stops. And so these populations that are off-world will start diverging from us. And, we see a lot of these different kind of alien types that look very human, bilateral symmetry, eyes above nose, above mouth, ears, 10 fingers, 10 toes. We see that form in a lot of these beings where people remember what they look like. They look very human, but different. They're taller, or their necks are longer, their heads are bigger, their eyes are bigger, or they look exactly like us in the case of some other encounters where people say we could just pass one on the street and not even know the difference. So these do seem to be all a very wide range of humans from interstellar colonies that come here periodically to get human primordial mother human DNA to bring back into the colonies, so that it slows this process. But that process may also be reaching an end where it can no longer hold back the forces of this divergent evolution. And so it might be the case now that it's necessary now that they reveal themselves and this whole program to the rest of us, in order to keep it going and sort of, I guess, maybe open up the planet for the interstellar community of humans, in a sense. But there's some cleaning up to do on this planet first.
Oh my gosh, so much cleaning up to do. I don't think they have enough garbage bags for that one. My curiosity goes towards things like the secret space program, where people have these, I guess they have these memories of being a part of it and things like that. I mean, how valid do you think that is to this discussion? You think they're really remembering something?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. On one hand, I do think remote viewing is a real thing, but on the other hand, the whole space is just being flooded with so much misdirection from the government, from guys like Richard Doty, confessed disinformation agent,
right.
To other more modern iterations of this, like, I'm positive Louis Elizondo and David Grush and this new wave of government whistleblowers, they're all just pulling our chains down the garden path to some, pile of bullshit that a military propaganda team cooked up in the back room somewhere. So it's hard to tell what the genuine stuff is. So I try to stick to only things where there is some real hard evidence to, and that's what makes the case of Peter Khoury so compelling to me, because Peter, Lebanese guy who moved to Australia, not a super remarkable guy. He worked as like a security guard, I think. Pretty average blue collar guy, just living in Australia. But like many contactees, had these stories of being visited as a child. But now as a grown up, he's visited by some female, not completely human looking people. And after this is all over, he finds a hair from one of them, and very unusual hair. It's like fishing line. It's practically translucent, because the woman was like this platinum blonde looking girl, and he reaches out to the UFO community, gets in contact with a researcher named Bill Chalker, and fortunately, Bill Chalker has a real journalistic background. He had connections and resources and a process to work with this kind of information, and he got it to a DNA lab. They test the DNA of the hair, and they find 100% human DNA, and it's from a line of humans that has not been seen on this planet for over 5,000 years. Now, unfortunately, she's a woman, so there's no Y haplogroup to determine here. So, couldn't tell if she's on the Royal Atlantean line, but she sure seems to look like a person that the legends say came from this region of the world. Now, the other woman who was with her, incidentally, looked like Vietnamese or South Asian. And so that to me, that kind of lends credence to the whole idea of another ancient society on a lost continent called Lemuria. Now, is this all just coincidence? Because I'm going to let you know something really interesting as well. In the Book of Enoch, they take him to Indonesia because the path that he says he plots takes him over Saudi Arabia, over the Erythraean Sea, which is the Persian Gulf, he goes past India and he comes to a land where he sees all kinds of birds and beasts of many different forms and types and calls, and just incredible animal biodiversity. Well, Indonesia is known today as for its incredible biodiversity. And so he goes all the way there in the Book of Enoch. So it stands to reason that the Atlanteans were at least active in this region of the world, and maybe there was another civilization there.
Makes sense. I can't argue with that either. One of the things that gets to me, which is keeping with the ET debacle, is the ones that have all of this evidence for aliens being demons and things like that. Why would you say such a strange thing is beyond me. I understand everybody's perspective, and I understand why perceptions would be like that. But, I mean, back to what you're saying, I think it's all just like the fallen ones, or, those kinds of deceptions occurring.
Well, it's very obvious at this point that the demons are running the planet. And this is an interesting topic, because there's an ancient book called the Testament of Solomon, and this is the one where Solomon gets he gets a ring from an angel that he can use to command demons. And so using this ring, he first ensnares one demon, and then he tells this demon, go to your lord and throw this ring at him. Because that's how you take control of the demon. You throw this ring at them, it hits them, and then now all of a sudden they're yours to command. So this all happens, and then here comes Beelzebub, the lord of the demons, and he has a discussion with Solomon. And Solomon asks him, who are you? Where did you come from? And Beelzebub explains that he is the last of the fallen angels who were kicked out of heaven, who, of course, and we know all about in the Book of Enoch. And further on, as Solomon is summoning more and more demons, he gives them, a very formulaic interview. What is your name? Where do you hail from? What do you do? Like, what is your purpose here in the world? And what are your, what angels are tasked with, overseeing you, or can control you, or frustrate you. And so this just happens again and again and again. But whenever these demons explain their parentage, they usually talk about themselves being a Nephilim, having their father being one of the fallen angels. There's only one who is a fallen angel, and that was Beelzebub. So one of the 200 fallen watchers, according to the Book of Enoch. So the demons are here. They're not up there in the UFOs, but there is a relationship to all of this, because the demons are essentially the exiles, the Atlantean exiles, because there was a civil war, again remembered in legends as the War in Heaven. Angels, the angels of Satan versus God and his angels, or Zeus and Kronos in the Titanomachy. We have this battle of gods or divine beings, some sort of civil war. This is an allusion to an Atlantean civil war. And so the losing side has who were cast out and wound up in the Middle East. They have sort of, as the course of history has sort of churned on, they have been transformed in our literature into these demons. And the angels that visited them in these ancient stories were the Atlanteans, like the angels who visit Ezekiel are flying around in some sort of divine vehicle, which sounds an awful lot like a UFO, something that can just lift off of the ground, hover, move around any direction it wants, because Ezekiel and these angels are just city hopping one to the other, one to the other. They get in the craft, fly to a city. He gets out, delivers a message. Back in the ship he goes, off to the next city, and on and on and on and on, and throughout the whole book of Ezekiel. And even in other parts of the Bible, it talks about God being in some sort of a vehicle. Only, the translations of this have not gone so well, but you see God, being in his glory, or the glory of God going out onto the water, or was above the mountains. And so they're not referring to something abstract like, the glory you get from winning a battle or from being an omnipotent being. They're talking about an actual vehicle, because there's another researcher whose name escapes me, but he can read ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, all the ancient texts that the Old Testament was written in, and the word in the ancient Hebrew is kavod, and it doesn't mean glory in the sense that we use it now. It does mean like some sort of a craft. So, but here we are in the present day now, where people are trying to flip the script now, and this is the whole theme of inversion. We're going to invert everything, and we're going to make men into women, and reproduction is bad, or we're going to have a month of pride, or we live in the crazy upside down world. Bad is good, white is dark, white is black. George Orwell's nightmare, So here we are in a world, and so how if the they're not the ones running the planet, it's the people who are here, and those are the demons. Of course, we all have internal demons as well, and the book talks about that too, because that's something everybody needs to be aware of and work on, because we do have this moment arriving where a unfathomably advanced culture will make its appearance, and we have to worry about coexistence now. And if history is any guide, of course, that's going to come down to how adaptable are you going to be to this new paradigm that is coming?
It's interesting because I haven't finished reading your book, but right around where you're currently talking is where I've reached in the book, and like the middle, and where you mention about Aleister Crowley and how he was the perfect tool for the Nephilim and stuff like that. I mean, I never really thought of it that way until I read that part, and then I just kind of stopped. So it's interesting that you brought that topic up there.
Yeah, Crowley went into the whole occult movement with an agenda of his own. I think that should be apparent to anybody who's looked at Crowley's career. But he was definitely an agent of the Nephilim, whether he understood it that way or not, because of the things that he was doing and the teachings that he was bringing out to people. These blood rituals and sacrificial magic, these kinds of practices are the things that got these fallen watchers into trouble. Things like human sacrifice or drinking blood, which is mentioned in the Book of Enoch. These sorts of practices are not permitted, and I think we can all understand why. But this culture, the ones that they were exiled from Atlantis, this is what they teach, and this is what they also trick people into practicing. And this is something also that comes out of the Bible very clearly, that these people, because in the Bible they'd become the Canaanites at this point, but the Bible very clearly links the Canaanites and the Nephilim together, and it says that they will trick people into worshiping demons as gods, or to sacrificing to demons as gods, and that's what all these elite people, these elite circles, are doing. They think it gives them power, but what it's really doing is it's just destroying their souls. So they live in eternity of misery, and that's really what's going on here. I think the Nephilim are trying to make this world as inhospitable as they possibly can to the rest of interstellar humanity, because they want this all to themselves, and that's also a big problem. This inborn greed that they seem to have, that they need to have everything, they need to control everything, and this obsession with money, more and power, and I always need more, and I'm never satisfied, and it's that I think a lot of people struggle to understand that drive, because a lot of people just don't have that drive. So yeah, we have to think, I think, in terms of humans as multidimensional beings, though, and the way you appear, let's say, in this 3D reality, maybe you do appear demonic or monstrous in other realms. So who knows?
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and I think that's one that you could talk about for hours. I agree with you on the Aleister Crowley thing. I've actually had people try to defend Aleister Crowley to me, and it's like, well, did you know him? Were you friends with him? Like, why are you? Have you studied anything about his behavior? What exactly is positive about his behavior? And I can't get a reasonable answer to those questions.
Here's a guy who works for British intelligence. He's into a lot of sodomy and blood rituals and blood magic and sex magic and torturing people or just doing the most gruesome stuff you can think of. Yeah, sure, he's a good guy. Sure, let's listen to him. He's going to tell us something divine and righteous and virtuous.
Yeah, exactly. So my final question is, to your estimation, how soon do you think these civilizations will make contact with us and make their presence fully known?
It's difficult to say. A lot of people talk about the returning golden age. There's obviously there's a very big debate over when that is exactly going to occur. We do have a message given to us by one of these Pleiadian visitors that's going to happen in 2028. So we do have that call. Now, what does that mean, though, is anyone's guess. Like it could be the year, a whole bunch of ships show up in the sky, or it could be the year of a global catastrophe that kills almost everybody. Who knows? But 2028 is the year. interestingly enough, she said that this date arrives after a 184-year-long transitional period. So if you go back 184 years from 2028, you get to the year Joseph Smith, the founding prophet of Mormonism, is assassinated. So that was an interesting sequence of events. Maybe the Mormons were onto something. I don't know.
Oh gosh, I don't know.
But if you want to believe the CIA, there's a CIA guy or ex-CIA, if you can ever be ex-CIA. But he says 2027 is going to be the year that there's some sort of alien event. But I think that's probably going to be like the fake alien invasion. And a lot of people have been saying there's going to be a fake alien invasion, Project Blue Beam, holograms in the sky, or real aliens that are hostile to humans that our ruling class is allied with. That would probably be my worst case scenario, but we'll see what happens, I guess.
Yeah. As far as I understand it, all of that Project Blue Beam and stuff is just a distractionary tactic. It's more layers to the mind control and the kind of trickery that goes into things, because I think people, the story is just believable enough for people to latch onto it. I don't know if the overlords, so to speak, really want that trouble. I don't know if they really want to go through all of that. Like, they would go through a lot of ends to do certain things. We've seen that, but would they really do all that? I don't know. I wonder. It reminds me of that old song, In the Year 2525. Yeah.
Well, we are living in very interesting times, and I think it does seem that we're being herded towards some sort of big alien reveal somehow, some way, and so
but it's all the same repetitive content. It's the same repetitive content. Like you mentioned, some key names like Richard Doty, etc., etc. So
those guys are never going to listen to these people, but listen to what they're saying, but no, it's bullshit. But there's going to be the seeds of truth in there as well, and you just have to get practiced at finding those, because they never seem to lie outright. They always tell the truth, but they tell it in a version that always makes themselves look like the good guys. And this is, of course, what the Nephilim have been doing since the days of the Bible, and I'm sure even before then.
Agreed. So, Chris, where can we find you?
Library of Cerne, CERNE.com. You can find the book on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, and in all the other online bookstores, paperback and EPUB. And at the bottom of the website, you'll find a link to a Telegram group where we can chat. So you can join us there.
Okay, great. Well, Chris, thanks for being on the Boundless Authenticity podcast.
Great. Thanks for having me on. Take care.
I'm Jahan Sator, a CTAA-accredited cognitive behavioral therapist, hypnotherapist, nutrition coach, mindfulness teacher, and specialist in the area of subconscious self-sabotage. You may also know me as the host of Boundless Authenticity. I assist by showing people of all walks of life how to be mindful and allow the negative automatic thoughts about the events of the external and the associated programs to reveal themselves fully, so that they can learn to establish deep inner peace and operate from purpose and passion. Much of my work focuses on removing the disempowering thoughts and beliefs from the subconscious mind, which cause us to create less than favorable emotional consequences and circumstances. I teach you various ways to change internal dialogue, clear harsh memories and emotions, and delete useless information from the subconscious. I also teach when to meditate, how to meditate, and why you have certain thoughts and feelings during meditation, and how to handle them effectively. If you or someone you know are struggling with self-sabotaging behaviors and harsh emotional consequences, please do contact me at selfsabotageinfo@proton.me. You're listening to the Boundless Authenticity podcast, where we discuss everything related to the evolution of human consciousness.
At the very least, people need to understand that the United States builds bunkers, which are basically cities underground, every 3 months.
Basically, when you dream, you tap into your subconscious. It is your nocturnal intuition, your creativity and imagination unchained from conscious reason, ego and logic.
They're biologically alive, but they have no soul. They have AI consciousness. They can alter your conscious of the brain to get the brain.
We live in a multidimensional reality. Whether it comes through esoteric information in the spiritual realms, or the UFO people, experiencers, or mainstream through quantum physics and through mainstream science now realizing that parallel dimensions probably exist.
We're all spiritual beings. We're all having these human experiences. We've heard that phrase over and over and over. But what does that really mean?
You know, all the big questions of life, we have these answers inside of our soul.
We're ultimately studying the nature of what it is to be human, good and evil, our psychology, how we think, and our health. That's why I love Bruce Lee's great quote, all knowledge is ultimately self-knowledge.
The Boundless Authenticity podcast.